Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show, the last for this week. We will be back, of course, next week, although there won't be a show on Monday because it will be a public holiday, so we hope that you all enjoy the long weekend. But let's get stuck into the news stories of today, and I will do that by introducing my guest to begin with. So, returning again for the second time this week, we have Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you?
How's Nick? How's Gabriel?
Yeah. And, of course, we have Gabriel. So this is our Monday crew back together again.
Tuesday, I think it is.
Tuesday, to storm the barricades and ensure freedom and liberty is delivered to all.
Here we go. All in a Thursday's work. Doesn't sound like
right.
Much. We can manage this.
That's all we do these days. So let us start off with something that Gabriel's had to speak on a bit recently in the public sphere, and that is Racism Week. And no, that's not a week where you're supposed to be racist. That's a week where we're supposed to fight racism. It was created by the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa, which is a group created by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation and the Nelson Mandela Foundation in 2015. And they host this thing annually. It's supposed to be from the 14th of March to the 21st, ending on Human Rights Day, which is the 21st of March. And the website of the Anti-Racism Network describes it as an annual action week aimed at creating public awareness about racism and how it affects individuals and broader society. It's about ensuring there is a countrywide focus on tackling racism and that it remains on the national agenda. While Anti-Racism Week is initiated by the Anti-Racism Network of South Africa, it aims to get all sectors of society involved and encourages self-initiated activities during the week. I'm not sure what a self-initiated anti-racism activity is, but perhaps we can discover that in our discussion. So, Gabriel, your thoughts on this? You've spoken about it before. What do you make of Anti-Racism Week?
So I think that there are good intentions. I think that the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation has done seriously good work. They were very important in organizing the Zuma Must Fall rallies after Kathrada himself, sort of after the grave, reached out through his funeral in a letter that was read out there to say that Zuma really must go and that all cadres that are abusing the revolution to fatten their own nests must go. The Kathrada Foundation hosted meetings at the Constitutional Hill structure there in Johannesburg, together with Save South Africa and others, that really mapped out the way forward and resulted in these protests. And those protests really, I think, tipped the balance of forces against Zuma, made it impossible for him to consider running for a third term as ANC leader, which had been on the cards until the time, and made it more difficult for his chosen heir, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, to take over the ANC from him. So I think it comes from a good place. I think that it's heavily informed by America's Black Lives Matter movement, its anti-racism movement. And so I've done quite a few radio interviews about this week, community radio stations, Johannesburg radio stations, and the talking points that the presenters have brought to me from basically the ARNSA, Anti-Racism Network South Africa's website, and its media liaisons, have been of the kind that give the following impression: racism equals white supremacy, anti-racism equals anti-capitalism. How do we redistribute wealth to end racism? And that's I
feel like a sleight of hand is being pulled here somehow.
It's not an original idea, but yesterday, I mean, the most interesting interview that I had was yesterday, which I do just want to share with you guys. So I was on Faith Mangope's show, Power FM. Power FM is I think it's got more listeners than 702 now. It's kind of one of the bigger Johannesburg radio stations. And I've been on there a couple of times. It's interesting. It's sort of more work than 702 is. And we were on for an hour. And Busi Siwe from the Anti-Racism Network, I can't remember her surname right now, and Terry Oakland-Smith, who sort of professionally goes to companies to tell their staff that if they're white, they're racist. we three had this debate for an hour, and it was described by the producer afterwards to me as fireworks. And it really was. And I'm not sure that I was on my best behavior. I did sort of speak over the host a couple of times while she was speaking over me. And I was reminded of that Winston Churchill quote, "Will you stop interrupting me while I'm interrupting you?" Anyway, so that's a bit naughty. One shouldn't really do that. Terry said that I showed myself to be white and male because only a white male would ever do such a thing, which gives you an insight of what you're paying for. Companies that are paying her to come and educate their staff. That's what they're getting for their money. But here's the thing that prompted the most strident fight, is that I said, according to Treasury, Terry Oakland Smith had said, the problem is there can be racism even without racists. That's the anti-racist view, because racism is really just capitalism. As long as there's capitalism, and as long as one race, the average of all earnings is higher than the average of all earnings of another race, or the absolute, then there's racism. Because racism is there's only no racism when there's equality of outcomes across all races. That's the theory, right? And they are right. You can have inequality of outcomes without racism. And so without racists. Anyway, I said, look, Terry made one mistake just on the facts, which is she said that white people have most wealth and income in South Africa. But according to Treasury, that's not true. As of about 2013, 2015, somewhere around there, white people were earning a minority, about 33% of all income. And the largest share of income for a particular intra-race group was black, top 10%, which on the narrow definition got 25% of income. White top 10% got 10% of income, so it's 2.5 times more. And if you expand it on the BEE definition, that difference just becomes bigger. So I made a mistake. I said Treasury. In fact, that data comes from Stats SA. But they said they were sort of collaborating with Treasury, their enterprises too. So, but that is my mistake. Whew! But I just, Faith, the host, said, this, we cannot stand for this narrative that black people have wealth in this country. And I'd said, as an example, just go to Sandton. And if you're surprised to see a rich dude in a sports car that's black, or some guy dropping 5,000 Rand on a bill at a nice restaurant that's black, then I just don't believe you've been to Sandton or any of the major sort of.
Right. I struggle to believe
hub.
that the hosts of Power FM have not been to Sandton. In fact, it's probably.
No, but they all got very excited. They said, there are great revelations happening on this radio show. We're learning where the Institute really gets its data from Sandton. They just go to Sandton and they look around and then they say, this is data. And so that's when I started interrupting her and saying, no, I got it from the Treasury, which is a terrible mistake because I got it from Stats SA. But I was getting it from the government anyway. So, and they really wouldn't let that point go. And then they screened the callers, and callers were coming through saying, I can't believe this guy's saying there's rich black people in South Africa. What is he talking about? Where does he come from? Is he living on cloud cuckoo land? And I think that tells you something about what anti-racism means. It means talking about the black experience. Time and time again, they talked about the black experience and the white, the white problem. Which to my mind kind of is racist. But anyway, I think that's why people they were so triggered by mention of inequality within the black group, because it's just the most obvious representation of differences in experience, the difference in the lifestyle of Patrice Motsepe or Cyril Ramaphosa or their children or any member of parliament versus the lifestyle of white people in squatter camps or black people in squatter camps or anyone who's in a squatter camp. There's just very, very large differences in lived experience. And that when they happen within a race, it kind of undermines the anti-racist charge, because the anti-racist charge is not really about stopping the practice of judging people according to their race. It's saying, no, you must judge people according to their race. Just judge them differently to how you currently do. So you should judge all black people to be disadvantaged and poor and locked out. And you should judge all white people to be privileged and sort of wicked unless they go about saying that only white males are aggressive and only all of the problems. Faith, the hostess, said all the problems in the country come from Oranje, basically, and Adam Katsavelos. So
that's an interesting view. So Marius, it sounds an awful lot like the way that some of these groups and some of the mainstream media outlets seem to conceive of anti-racism as just racial national socialism. Or
Yeah, it
am I
seems
being
like
unfair?
that. No, I think it's the term anti-racist. We've been told you're not allowed to be non-racist anymore. You have to be anti-racist, because to be non-racist, you're actually a racist. And there's also this belief. I mean, as Gabriel said, this host of this radio show said all problems in South Africa come from Oranje. And we've seen, we get told white supremacy is this massive problem in South Africa and the US. And I saw somebody on Twitter, they tweeted that this belief in the problem of white supremacy is the new moral panic. People think white supremacy is this massive problem. Even now, in the US, there have been some unprovoked attacks on Asian Americans, often by African Americans. And we get told this is because of white supremacy and capitalism, which is quite bizarre in itself. And also it actually takes away the agency from people. It's saying it's actually not your fault that you're being a bad guy. It's white supremacy and capitalism's fault. So it's also, I just think it's, and also just breaking people into race groups, and only the victim of their race group, they have no agency whatsoever, which always, just always find problematic way of thinking. And Gabriel was talking earlier about the good work that the Crouse Foundation has done, which I think I agree with him broadly. But also, they've also come out with an anti-racism app where you can report where there's been racism, and where the Crouse Foundation will be able to identify what they call racism hotspots. So now I'm not too sure what they'll do when they've identified this racism hotspot, if they'll go to, I don't know, flipping the V&A waterfront or the keg in Boksburg or whatever, and go quarantine the place or bomb it or something. I'm not too sure. But also, I mean, as we were saying before the show, I think a good way to, whenever you read something about anti-racism, instead of replace the word racism in your head with the word witchcraft. And then also, I think that actually gets closer to what the people behind some of these anti-racist movements actually mean.
Right. I must say that this is, if anyone ever asks me why I just loathe this particular line of thinking that Gabriel expressed, said that his opponents were bringing forward here, they say, don't believe your lying eyes that there are actually wealthy black South Africans, and instead focus on white supremacy and white racism while the power is going off, while the country is unemployed, while everything breaks around us. And to me, that's just endlessly infuriating, because it's so obviously a distraction from the real suffering of South Africans that goes on every single day. And yet, we instead have to...
And the thing is, sorry, I just want to interrupt to say that I don't want to unfairly represent the host's position, because it started out with, the problem is Oranje and Adam Katsavelos, and how is it still allowed in this country? And this is a sign. This explains why so many black people are unemployed and poor. And then after I had a bit of a spiel, it's like, okay, no, there's two issues. There's government accountability, and then there's also this racism thing, which is causing all of the problems. And what's interesting there is the slipperiness of language and the influential role that leading anti-racists play. So then you have callers phoning in, and some are sort of just going on, who's this young white boy? What does he know about life? He says that they're rich black people, but there's no such thing. But then there's a guy who calls in, and I started out by saying Institute of Race Relations surveys show that, like, while the media is obsessed with this and politicians like to scapegoat all sort of issues onto whiteness, most South Africans are much more reasonable. And the supermajority of South Africans think that with more jobs and better education, the differences between races that are sort of frictious are going to that give off heat and problems are going to dissolve away. A guy calls in saying exactly that. He says, I just think if the problem is when people don't have a job, then they get angry and they get lost, and like they lose respect for themselves, and that's why we have like black people chasing after white people and worrying about this. if everyone just found a job and everyone had a good education to get a good job, then the issue would not be so bad. Then the host says, yeah, but, and I can't even remember how she did it, but she sort of asked one or two questions to sort of prompt him away from what he had just said, and to say, but the reason that the education system is so terrible, or the reason that people aren't getting jobs, is because of white monopoly capital. And then she's like, now I agree with you, comrade. So this is like the battle of ideas playing out, right? Anti-racism sounds very nice. It attracts a lot of people. We all should be anti-racist in the sense that we should all be irritated by, at the very least, racism, and we should all oppose it if we expect our politics to improve. So you take that good idea and then you use it to twist the sense of reality, of economic facts, of government's legacy, of the pattern and practice of bait and switch, where you steal with the one hand and point at WMD with the other. You distract from all of that. In fact, you perpetuate it. Once WMC, having hooked people on this,
not WMD.
White monopoly domination.
Okay.
Anyways, it really is like the path to hell is laid with good intentions. You know, you start out with a good intention, but you don't think critically. You allow yourself to get dragged by your nose, and this is where we sit.
It's also playing with words. It's the same as, I think Antifa, which is anti-fascist. And you say, geez, like, I don't really like these Antifa guys going around and smashing windows and rioting. They're like, but they're literally anti-fascists. So if you don't like them, you're a fascist. Like, no, it's just, playing with words and so on. Exactly.
And people who dress in black and beat up people in the streets are apparently anti-fascist.
Exactly. But I just think also this belief that white racism is so endemic in South Africa and such a terrible thing. I think the fact that people like Adam Katsavelos are basically ostracized from society shows you, and number one, that it makes huge news when somebody gets caught on camera using the K word. And you guys are probably too young to remember this, but in 1998, Andre Markgraaff, he was coach of the Springboks. I can't remember if he was coach at the time. He was caught on a telephone call using the K word. He was talking about the K interference in rugby and so on. And obviously there was a big outcry at the time, and he had to step down. As I can't remember if he was Springbok coach, but he had to step down from his position. But a couple of years later, he was pretty much rehabilitated. He was back. He wasn't ostracized like what happened to Penny Sparrow and Vicky Momberg and Adam Katsavelos. So this was the late 90s when obviously already, apartheid had ended. But I think even then people were going, this is kind of what we expect, whites are racist. But now what happens, as I say, with all these people, Vicky Momberg went to jail for saying the word, Obviously, nobody can condone what Vicky Momberg did, but I definitely don't think she should be going to jail for saying words. But anyway, just the point is, when a white person is explicitly racist like that, it makes huge news in the country, and they are ostracized by basically everybody. Excuse me?
Yes. And they get shut down, and you should look at that as evidence that this country has defeated or is defeating that kind of racism.
Exactly.
Not as evidence that it's so bad.
Yeah,
the host literally said, the most recently, it's a day-to-day experience. For example, Adam Katsavelos in 2018 or 2019.
And it was the biggest news in South Africa for about a month.
Right.
And it's still the most recent example she can think of years ago. Since then, we've had Petrus Michels and Collins Khoza and Sibusiso Amos and 50 other people shot in 3 or 6 weeks of lockdown. We've had 20,000 or 30,000 murders. We've had 50,000 COVID deaths. We've had like 10,000 hours of lockdown, no electricity. We've had 3 million jobs get lost, and then a few get found, and then they're going to get lost again. We've had 1 million children that were 18 years old not pass matric with maths.
14%.
But the thing that you mustn't forget, we've been downgraded to junk status several times, like we're too late.
Adam Katsavelos said the K word 3 years ago.
Yeah, it is incredibly.
And we've had the EFF really expand the network of black people that they're prepared to call House N-word as a really important and unaddressed form of racism. That the day an anti-racist says, look, never mind just talking conceptually about the fact that black people can be racist. Let's talk about black people that are powerful, that are sitting in parliament, that are making a lot of money, and that are abusing other black people on the basis of race. And let's stop that. I'll say, well, you're no longer, now what's on the box is in the box. You're not just pretending to be anti-racist when you're really anti-property rights. You're actually being anti-racist. But that day, it's going to take years for that day to come.
Right. Now, there's this continuing sort of insistence by the anti-racist crowd that we're still living in the 1960s and that nothing has changed. And it's once you become woke to this, you realize that we've made absolutely no racial progress in decades and decades, which is
It's worse because it's
nothing.
secret now. Someone actually
Right.
said,
Yeah.
Right. It's worse because it's secret now, which, quite frankly, is a disgusting lie that just throws sand in the face of all the people who struggled their entire lives and oftentimes gave their lives to defeat some of the nasty types of racism that they're talking about, particularly anti-black racism. Anyway, let us move on. This has been a good discussion. It went much longer over time, but yeah, we're definitely going to return to this subject because this, in many ways, is one of the reasons why South Africa is trapped in this psychological prison that keeps us excusing evil and embracing failure rather than moving on to good ideas and prosperity. So, speaking of people trying to get us out of the government's mess, the Western Cape had an ambitious plan. The DA run Western Cape had an ambitious plan to buy a large number of vaccines for its population, and that it would have a vaccine program that would run in parallel to government's one that would supplement it and, in their hopes, sort of surpass it in making sure that people in the Western Cape were vaccinated as soon as possible. However, the Western Cape Minister for Health, Nomo French Mbombo, said, we approached Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson to sell a vaccine to the province, and they said, no, we want to engage only with national. So this has now scrapped the Western Cape's plans to buy vaccines for themselves, as they have to rely on the national government to purchase them. And this is, I think, a little bit of a complicated issue. Gabriel, what do you make of this story and what Normal French is saying here?
So I hope that Norma French is not being ambiguous. What my understanding is that the vaccine producers don't want to sell vaccines to any entity in a country that hasn't approved that vaccine. So they don't want to go around the approval process. And that's for the obvious reason that they don't want to encourage anti-vaxxers who are saying, look, these guys are like, handing out vaccines, companies or provinces or whatever that haven't been approved. And that approval process is national. But if they're really saying we under no circumstances are going to sell to anything but the government, then basically what they're doing is they're approving Bolsonaro's plan. Bolsonaro is the anti-gay, homophobe, rather dictatorial leader of Brazil, who's himself a kind of vaccine skeptic and so on. And he said that, in Brazil, all of the vaccines are going to go through the federal government, but the federal government, much better organized than ours, but not that well organized, wasn't doing a great job of it. So its province, it's got a federal system, its chief state, Sao Paulo, which is capital in Sao Paulo, they said, no, we're going to go around you and we're going to get the vaccines. And they had vaccine production facilities. They didn't have vaccine IP, intellectual property. So they got that by going around the government. And then they made the vaccines themselves. And then they publicly vaccinated people before the federal government's program had started or it was allowed, saying the ball's in your court. Are you going to stop us from vaccinating people now that we've started? Are you going to come and arrest the doctors and nurses that have administered this life-saving stuff? And of course, that is not what happened. Bolsonaro was forced to accelerate the national program to allow the province to supply the federal government with the vaccine, so the province gets credit for it. And that matters because the head of the Sao Paulo province state is himself going to challenge Bolsonaro for the presidency in the next Brazilian election. So, Bolsonaro is losing political clout because a province managed to do what the state would rather have done all by itself. So if Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer are saying, we're not going to sell to the Western Cape, then they're basically saying, Sao Paulo did the wrong thing. It would have been better to go Bolsonaro's way, to have the vaccine rollout be slower, to have more people die, but to keep the current president in such a position where he or she gets all of the credit, and you don't introduce a confusion into the body politic about, who to say thank you to. I think that would be a terrible mistake coming from those guys, and we'll be looking into it to see exactly what their reasons are for this decision. If it is a real decision, it might have been misrepresented. As I've said, maybe they really were just saying we're not going to do it until the HRPA approves, or the SAMRC approves the vaccine.
Right. I believe the exact quote from Noma French Mbombo was, "It's not against the law for the province or anyone to procure the vaccine. It's up to the provider to decide whether to tender." So she seems to be putting the blame squarely on them. It's not clear, if there isn't any reasoning. There's, like a lot of stories in South Africa, it's not been very well reported.
Well, it's anti-racism week, so we have to talk about Adam Katsavelis, Nick.
Yeah, we have to talk about that dude instead of the biggest problem that we have at the moment. Marius, what do you make of this?
So is Noma French and Bombo saying that people like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, etc., have to first come and tender for the vaccine rollout to the Western Cape? Or
No.
Surely,
I think she's saying that the company decides whether to give it out to them.
because if, as Gabriel says, if the things, I think would be a mistake, and as you say, Gabriel, how many lives could still be lost, and how much economic damage could there be to the country if we carry on waiting for this vaccine? And that in general, the government seems to have been very lackadaisical in its approach to securing a vaccine. There seems to be no urgency whatsoever, and we get told there's, a couple of months ago, we were told that we in negotiations with the vaccine providers and so on. That's what President Ramaphosa told us, and it's still not clear if he was actually telling the truth about that. And we've seen this latest thing with the vaccine going out of date, and a lot of people have said there's actually that vaccine is still completely usable, and it's completely silly to sell it to other countries and start rolling it out to people immediately. So let's hope that where possible, the governments like the Western Cape or private providers, I think I've spoken on the show before that Sibanye-Stillwater, it's a mining company, it's the biggest private employer in the country. They were looking into securing vaccines for not only their staff, but their staff's dependents and the communities that work and live around their mines. So it wasn't going to be one of these, some lefty would tell you it's a symptom of late-stage capitalism where companies only, vaccinating its workers. This is the company with the social conscience would be helping as many people as it can within reason. And so at the end of the day, Sibanye-Stillwater should not be the one who's getting vaccines for its workers. It should be the South African government. But we've seen how badly it's done. And Nick, as you pointed out, it's a country like Rwanda, who's got a much lower per capita income than South Africa, has vaccinated far more people than we have. As we all know, there'll be no consequences for this. But Zweli Mkhize and everybody in the health department, and including President Ramaphosa, actually should be hanging their heads in shame that we've only vaccinated 150,000 people. And at the current rate, when I played with that dashboard on Media Hack, I think we'll have vaccinated everybody in about 10 years' time. So we'll come out of lockdown in about 2031 if we're lucky at the current rate. So,
Marius, you're so optimistic. It's 17 years, 6 months, and 19 days.
No, my calculation is 10 years. Media Hacks is wrong. My calculation is right. It's 10 years. But anyway, I just want to say about the Western Cape province's position. There was a release by the CEO of the vaccine company that supplied Israel with its production, who said, "I just want to congratulate Netanyahu, who's not everyone's favorite political figure, but he said, that guy called me 30 times. He just wouldn't stop calling me. If your mother is dying and you need an ambulance to come and fetch her because there's no ways you can take her in a car, you're gonna phone the hospital, and it's busy. We're not sure that we can. You're gonna hang up and you're gonna say, we'll wait. They said they'll get back to us. Absolutely not. You phone again, you phone again, you phone again,
Right.
you phone again,
Right.
you phone again. You apply pressure consistently against these companies. This is a race against time. I think Discovery could very well be right. It lines up with my kind of calculation. Maybe half the country, more than half the country already has the virus. Maybe it's going to be the third wave is not going to be as bad as the second wave. Instead of another 30 or 40,000 people dying, another 15,000 people dying. I think that for a
15,000 still 15,000 too many.
Yeah, for a vaccine that costs like 200 to 700 Rand per unit, to save a life for 700 Rand and not be able to do that because of some political game between companies that don't want to irritate governments and governments that don't want to lose the credit to provinces and provinces that don't want to phone and phone and phone. It is a shame. It's a crying shame. And the fact that we're more exercised in this week in the broader South African media by things like racism it's just flipping irritating. They really need to wake up in the DA. They really
I just have, I just have one question. Say the Western Cape can secure the vaccine. Would the three of us be able to get on a plane from Tambo, land at Cape Town International, and go to the nearest Western Cape clinic and say, "How's it? I'd like the vaccine." Well, let's say, do you live here? You know, like, well, how would it work? I'd be quite interested to know.
Yeah, that's a whole can of worms that will need to be opened up, I think, in the future. And let's, that would be a good problem to have.
Yes.
But anyway, we need to close it there because we are going over time. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening. We will be back next week. And Marius will be hosting the show on Tuesday as I am moving house. So good luck to him. And I think he'll do a marvelous job. And thanks, Gabriel. So there we shall call it to a close. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next week. Have a great long weekend, everyone.